Montana Territory, 1872. The scent of pine rode the wind as Zane Sterling surveyed the sprawling valley from atop his chestnut mare. At 24, he'd already carved out his place in Whispering Creek. 500 acres of prime cattle land, a sturdy two-bedroom cabin, and a reputation as the finest horse breaker this side of the Rockies. Not bad for an orphan who'd arrived with nothing but determination and a worn saddle 4 years ago. The wind tousled his sandy hair as he squinted at the horizon, where storm clouds gathered. His lean frame tensed instinctively. Experience had taught him that beauty and danger walked hand in hand in this territory, much like people. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, not after watching his parents' kindness repaid with violence during a homestead raid when he was just 12. A man stands stronger alone, he muttered to his horse, a mantra that had carried him through 12 years of drifting before settling here. No attachments, no disappointments. His ranch hands respected him. The townspeople nodded in greeting, but none penetrated the careful distance he maintained. Yet on nights when the coyotes howled under moonlight, when the cabin creaked with emptiness, Zane felt the weight of solitude. He pushed those thoughts away with work, endless, consuming work that left no room for reflection. The Sterling Ranch would be the biggest in the territory one day. That was enough. It had to be. His foreman's words from that morning echoed in his mind. "Boss, you're building something fine here, but who's it for?" Man needs more than cattle and timber to warm his nights. Zane had dismissed the comment with a scowl, but now, facing the vastness of his land, the question lingered uncomfortably. He clicked his tongue, turning his horse toward town. The supply list wouldn't fill itself, and dwelling on such thoughts was pointless. The frontier had no place for sentimentality. The main street of Whispering Creek bustled with unusual activity when Zane arrived. A stagecoach, not due until tomorrow, stood outside the hotel, surrounded by curious onlookers. He tethered his horse to the hitching post outside the general store, his attention caught by a flash of emerald green. Standing beside the coach was a young woman unlike any Zane had seen in this dusty outpost. Her chestnut hair was styled in an elaborate twist that spoke of Eastern sophistication, her traveling dress of fine green wool clearly tailored by skilled hands. She clutched a small valise, her posture straight despite evident exhaustion. "Who's that?" Zane asked Tom Miller, the blacksmith, who had stepped outside his shop to observe the commotion. "Sophia Adams," Tom replied. "Judge Adams's niece from Boston. Arrived unexpected-like." He lowered his voice. "Word is she's running from something. Scandal, maybe." Zane nodded, intending to continue on his errand, when Sophia turned, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. Hers were amber, almost golden in the afternoon light, and held a defiance at odds with her refined appearance. Something in them, a familiar determination, perhaps, stopped him in his tracks. Then Mayor Caldwell stepped forward, clapping his hands. "Friends, as you know, Judge Adams took ill last month in Denver. I've just received word that his condition has worsened. His niece, Miss Adams, has arrived to manage his affairs." A murmur passed through the crowd. Judge Adams was the most respected man in the county, the founder of Whispering Creek 20 years earlier. His illness had left a void in the community. Unfortunately, the mayor continued, eyeing Sophia with undisguised disapproval. "The judge's house suffered water damage during the spring floods. Miss Adams will need lodging until repairs are complete." Zane watched as townsfolk shifted uncomfortably. No respectable family would house an unmarried woman without a chaperone, especially one who had arrived under mysterious circumstances. The boarding house was full with railroad surveyors, and the hotel proprietor, Mrs. Henderson, was notoriously selective about single female guests. "She can stay with us," declared Widow Patterson, stepping forward. At 65, she was beyond reproach. "My Martha's room has been empty these 3 years since she married." Relief passed over Sophia's face, only to vanish as Mayor Caldwell cleared his throat. Mrs. Patterson, while your offer is generous, there is the matter of propriety. Miss Adams's situation in Boston was, shall we say, complicated." Sophia's cheeks flushed. "My situation, as you put it, was the result of malicious gossip and nothing more." Nevertheless, the mayor continued smoothly. The judge was quite clear about preserving appearances. His position demands certain standards, especially with his niece acting as his representative. Zane found himself moving forward before he'd formed a coherent thought. I'll marry her. The words hung in the stunned silence. No one looked more surprised than Sophia herself, her amber eyes widening as she stared at him. I beg your pardon, she finally managed. Zane removed his hat, revealing the full contours of his face, the straight nose, the firm jaw, the clear blue eyes that had earned him unasked for female attention since he was 16. Miss Adams, I'm Zane Sterling. I own the ranch north of town. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I can offer you a respectable name and a good home until your uncle recovers. After that, we can quietly arrange an annulment if you wish. This is absurd, she whispered fiercely. I don't know you. You need a solution. I'm offering one. He glanced at the gathering crowd, aware of the whispers. Your reputation will remain intact, and you'll have the freedom to manage your uncle's affairs without gossip following your every move. Her eyes narrowed suspiciously. And what do you get from this arrangement, Mr. Sterling? A fair question he hadn't considered. Peace, he finally said. The mayor and the town council have been pressuring me to sell water rights to the North Pasture. As the judge's niece by marriage, you'd have influence they couldn't ignore. It wasn't entirely true. He could handle the council, but it sounded more reasonable than admitting to the impulse he didn't understand himself. Sophia studied him for a long moment, measuring him with a shrewdness that suggested she was accustomed to navigating difficult situations. Finally, she nodded almost imperceptibly. When? Now? Today? The Reverend's right there. Zane indicated the Methodist minister who had joined the onlookers. This is madness, she breathed, but he noticed her shoulders straightening, her chin lifting. Very well, Mr. Sterling. It seems we have an arrangement. 2 hours later, they stood in Reverend Walsh's small church, exchanging vows before a handful of witnesses. Sophia wore the same travel-worn green dress, while Zane had only had time to wash his face and brush his clothes. The ceremony was brief, practical, devoid of sentiment, exactly as Zane preferred things. As they rode toward his ranch in tense silence, the storm that had threatened all day finally broke. Rain pounded the roof of the wagon, isolating them in a world of sound and shadow. Thank you, Sophia said suddenly, her voice barely audible above the downpour. You saved me from an impossible situation. Zane kept his eyes on the muddy road. We made a practical arrangement, Mrs. Sterling. No need for gratitude. Sophia, she corrected. If we're to convince anyone this is real, you should use my name. He nodded, uncomfortably aware of her scent, something floral and unfamiliar, in the close confines of the wagon. The cabin has 2 bedrooms. You'll have your privacy. I appreciate that. She hesitated. I should tell you. What they're saying about me in Boston, your past is your business, he interrupted. We all come west with stories we'd rather leave behind. She fell silent, and he felt her studying his profile. You don't strike me as a man who acts on impulse, Mr. Sterling. Zane, he corrected automatically. And I'm not. I just know a storm when I see one brewing. He glanced at her. Both kinds. A small smile curved her lips. Then we understand each other. But as the Sterling Ranch came into view, its buildings solid against the gathering darkness, Zane wasn't sure they understood anything at all. He had invited a stranger into his carefully ordered world, breaking every rule he'd set for himself. Whatever storm had brought Sophia Adams to Montana, he had just positioned himself directly in its path. The first week of their unusual marriage passed in cautious negotiation of space and routines. Zane rose before dawn, taking breakfast alone before riding out to work with his cattle and horses. Sophia busied herself with organizing the judge's papers, which she had arranged to have delivered to the ranch. They shared evening meals and stilted conversation before retreating to their separate rooms. On the 8th day, Zane returned from checking fence lines to find his house transformed. The scent of fresh bread filled the air, the floors gleamed with polish, and wildflowers brightened the table. Sophia stood at the stove, her chestnut hair tied back with a simple ribbon, wearing a blue calico dress far simpler than her arrival attire. I hope you don't mind, she said, noticing his surprised inspection. Your housekeeper seemed overwhelmed with the laundry and cooking for the ranch hands. I offered to manage the house myself. You don't have to do that. Zane hung his hat on the hook by the door. I hired Mrs. Finley to handle things. I'm aware, but I'm not accustomed to idleness. and there's only so much legal correspondence I can manage in a day. She removed a loaf from the oven, the movement practiced and confident. Besides, this is my home now, temporary though it may be. You've done fine work, he acknowledged, noticing details he'd never considered important. The arrangement of books on the shelf, the mended curtains, the polished brass lamp that had been his mother's. Where did you learn housekeeping? I wouldn't have thought Boston society prepared women for such tasks. A shadow crossed her face. My parents died when I was 18. Typhoid. Uncle Edward offered me a home, but his wife. She shrugged. She made it clear I needed to earn my keep. I learned quickly. Zane nodded, recognizing the familiar weight of early loss. My parents were killed by raiders when I was 12. I worked ranch jobs across 3 territories before saving enough for this land. We're a matched pair of orphans, then, she said, a tentative warmth in her voice. Perhaps that's why you understood my predicament so readily. Something shifted between them, not intimacy exactly, but the recognition of shared experience. That evening, their conversation flowed more easily, touching on books they'd read, places they'd seen, the peculiarities of Whispering Creek's residents. The following Sunday, they attended church together, presenting a united front that silenced much of the gossip. Judge Adams's house repairs progressed slowly, but Sophia seemed in no hurry to mention it. Instead, she became a quiet, steadying presence in Zane's life. She learned the names of his ranch hands, kept accounts with meticulous care, and began planting a vegetable garden beside the house. Zane found himself lingering over morning coffee, sharing ranch concerns he'd previously kept to himself. When she suggested improvements to the barn layout, he was surprised by her practical insight. When a spring calf fell ill, she stayed up through the night with him, administering medicines with capable hands. You keep surprising me, he admitted one evening as they sat on the porch, watching lightning dance across distant mountains. I didn't expect a Boston judge's niece to know about cattle diseases or how to patch a roof. She smiled, the expression transforming her serious face. At 22, Sophia possessed a maturity that belied her years, but when she smiled, Zane caught glimpses of a lighter spirit beneath the composed exterior. People see what they expect to see, she replied. In Boston, I was the orphan niece, the subject of pity and speculation. Here, she gestured at the vast landscape before them. Here I can simply be myself. And who is that? Zane asked, genuinely curious. Her amber eyes met his, surprising in their directness. I'm still discovering that. But I know I'm someone who prefers honest work to idle gossip, who would rather watch a thunderstorm from a porch than attend a society ball, and who finds more beauty in this wild country every day. The admission hung between them, unexpectedly intimate. Zane found himself studying the curve of her cheek, the graceful line of her neck, wondering what it would be like to reach across the space between their chairs and take her hand. The thought startled him. This was a marriage of convenience, a temporary arrangement. Attachment would only complicate matters when the time came for her to leave. It's getting late, he said abruptly, rising. I've got an early start tomorrow. The cattle drive to Fort Benton begins next week. Disappointment flickered across her face, quickly masked. Of course. Good night, Zane. That night, he lay awake listening to the soft sounds of her moving in the next room, troubled by feelings he'd never anticipated when making his impulsive offer in town. Sophia Adams, Sterling now, was becoming dangerously important to him, and he had no idea what to do about it. The cattle drive loomed, a 2-week journey that would take Zane and most of his men north to the Missouri River trading post. The night before his departure, tension filled the cabin as they ate in unusual silence. I've left instructions with Mrs. Finley to check on you, Zane said finally. And James will stay behind to handle the horses and any problems that arise. Sophia nodded, pushing food around her plate. I'll manage just fine. She hesitated. Zane, before you go, there's something I should tell you. The serious tone caught his attention. What is it? She set down her fork, hands folding in her lap. The situation in Boston, the reason I came west so suddenly. Her eyes met his, determined yet apprehensive. I was engaged to marry Frederick Worthington, son of my uncle's closest friend and business partner. The match was arranged when I was 19, before I understood what kind of man Frederick was. Zane waited, sensing her struggle to continue. He was controlling, possessive. He presented one face to society and another in private. Her voice steadied. 3 months ago, I discovered he had another woman, his family's maid. She was expecting his child. I see, Zane said quietly. When I confronted him, he became violent. No visible bruises, he was careful about that, but she touched her wrist unconsciously. I broke the engagement. He spread rumors that I had been unfaithful, that I was unstable and prone to hysterics. His family's influence ensured the gossip spread quickly. Anger flashed through Zane, surprising him with its intensity. Is that why you came here? You were running from him. She nodded. Uncle Edward supported my decision, but his wife, she believed Frederick's lies. When Uncle fell ill, it gave me the perfect reason to leave Boston. I needed to escape before the Worthingtons destroyed what remained of my reputation. And now you're tied to a stranger in a marriage neither of us planned, Zane said, understanding the full weight of what she'd sacrificed. A stranger who showed more kindness in one impulsive moment than Frederick did in 3 years of courtship. Her smile was sad but genuine. I don't regret our arrangement, Zane. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. Neither do I. For a long moment, they remained connected by that simple touch, something unspoken passing between them. Then Sophia withdrew her hand, rising to clear the dishes. Be careful on the trail, she said softly. Come back safely. I always do, he assured her. But as he prepared for the drive the next morning, Zane realized he had never before had someone waiting for his return. The thought followed him as he led his men and cattle north, warming him during cold nights under vast starlit skies. The cattle drive was successful but grueling. A late spring storm delayed them. A river crossing nearly ended in disaster, and negotiations in Fort Benton proved more complex than anticipated. When Zane finally led his exhausted men back toward Whispering Creek after nearly 3 weeks away, he found himself pushing the pace, eager for the sight of his ranch, and for Sophia. They crested the final ridge as sunset painted the valley gold. Zane reined in sharply, the men behind him murmuring in confusion. Below, where his ranch should have stood in peaceful isolation, wagons clustered around the main house. A large canvas tent had been erected beside the barn, and smoke rose from multiple cooking fires. What in blazes? His foreman muttered. Zane spurred his horse forward, alarm driving his exhaustion away. As they approached, he made out women moving between the house and tent, children running in the yard, and men unloading supplies from wagons. In the center of this unexpected activity stood Sophia, directing operations with calm authority. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair braided practically down her back, looking for all the world like she'd been managing frontier crises her entire life. She spotted him as he dismounted, her face lighting with a smile that caught him off guard with its genuine warmth. Zane, thank goodness you're back. What's happened? He demanded, scanning the scene for signs of danger. Why are all these people here? Measles, she explained, leading him toward the house. It broke out in town just after you left. The doctor was overwhelmed, so I offered our land for those needing isolation and care. She gestured toward the tent. We have 15 children and their mothers here now. The worst cases are in the barn, where we set up a proper infirmary. Zane stared at her in disbelief. You turned our ranch into a hospital? I had no choice, she replied, her chin lifting in that determined way he'd come to recognize. These families had nowhere else to go. The town council wanted to quarantine them in the abandoned mine shacks. Can you imagine? In this weather, with sick children? He ran a hand through his dust-covered hair, trying to process the transformation of his orderly world. How are you managing all this? Mrs. Patterson has nursing experience. Dr. Lewis visits daily. The mothers help each other, and some of the fathers have been cutting wood and helping with chores as payment. Her expression softened. I know it's a shock, Zane, but these people needed help. I couldn't turn them away. Looking around, Zane saw not chaos, but organization. Washing lines neatly strung, cooking areas well arranged, children recovering enough to play in designated areas away from the sicker patients. Sophia had turned his ranch into a functioning community in his absence. Are you angry? She asked when he remained silent. No, he realized with surprise. No, I'm not angry. He studied her face, tired but animated with purpose. You've done something remarkable here. Relief crossed her features. I was afraid you'd think I'd overstepped. This is your home too. he said, the words feeling right as he spoke them. These are your neighbors now as much as mine. Her smile in response was worth every hardship of the trail. That night, despite his exhaustion, Zane joined the community dinner served under the stars. He watched Sophia move among the families, checking on patients, comforting mothers, organizing the next day's care with quiet efficiency. These people looked at her with respect and gratitude, not as the subject of Boston gossip or a convenient solution to a scandal, but as a woman of substance and compassion. When a small girl with fading measles spots crawled into Sophia's lap, resting her head trustingly against her shoulder, Zane felt something shift permanently inside him. The walls he'd built since his parents' death, the certainty that he was better off alone, began to crumble in the face of this evidence that connection, community, could be strength rather than weakness. As spring warmed into summer, the measles epidemic passed. Families returned to town. The judge's house repairs were completed, but Sophia remained at the ranch with no mention of their original arrangement. Their marriage, begun as convenience, evolved into partnership as she took charge of household accounts and correspondence, freeing Zane to expand his breeding program and purchase additional grazing land. In July, Judge Adams sent word that his health had improved enough to return to Whispering Creek by summer's end. The letter sat on the mantel for 3 days, neither Zane nor Sophia mentioning its implications for their future. On a sweltering afternoon, Zane returned from inspecting new yearlings to find the house empty. A note on the table informed him that Sophia had ridden to town for supplies. Unusual, as they typically made such trips together, but not concerning until he noticed the hour. The sun was setting, and she had been gone since morning. Worry propelled him back into the saddle. Halfway to town, he encountered James riding hard in his direction. "Boss, there's trouble," the young ranch hand called. "Mrs. Sterling's been hurt." The Murray brothers started something at the mercantile. Cold fear gripped Zane's chest. The Murrays were notorious troublemakers who'd grown bolder since their father died last winter. "How bad?" Doc's with her at his office. "She took a bad fall when their horses spooked hers, but she was conscious when I left." Zane urged his horse to a gallop, covering the remaining distance to town in record time. He found Sophia sitting on an examination table, a bandage wrapped around her forehead, her dress torn and muddied. "I'm perfectly fine," she was insisting to Dr. Lewis as Zane burst in. "Just a bump and some bruises." Sophia. Her name escaped him like a prayer as relief flooded through him. She turned, wincing slightly at the movement. "Zane, I'm sorry to worry you. What happened?" He moved to her side, taking her hand, needing the physical connection to assure himself she was truly all right. "The Murray boys were drunk before noon," Dr. Lewis explained when Sophia hesitated. "Started making comments about Eastern women who come west with secrets. When your wife ignored them, they decided to make a show of surrounding her wagon on horseback. They frightened my mare," Sophia continued. "I was thrown when she bolted. The wagon overturned." Her fingers tightened around Zane's. "I'm truly not badly hurt, but our supplies are scattered halfway to the creek." Fury rose in Zane's throat. "Where are they now?" "Sheriff's got them locked up," the doctor said. "But they'll be out by morning. Their uncle's the mayor, after all." Zane nodded grimly. "Can she travel? I want her home tonight." "Slowly," Dr. Lewis cautioned. "And she'll need rest for several days. That head injury could have been much worse." They made the journey back to the ranch in silence, Zane driving the replacement wagon carefully over every bump while Sophia leaned against his shoulder. By the time they arrived, her face was pale with pain she wouldn't admit to. Zane carried her inside despite her protests. "You do the same for any of your measles patients," he reminded her. "Allow someone to care for you for once." She relented, resting in their sitting room while he prepared a simple supper. As darkness fell, he built a fire against the evening chill and sat beside her chair. "What the Mois said," he began carefully. "About Eastern women with secrets. It's nothing," she interrupted. "Drunk men talking nonsense." But he noted the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers worried at a loose thread on her sleeve. "Sophia, is there something you haven't told me? About Boston or Frederick Worthington?" Her silence stretched long enough that he thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, she sighed, turning to face him fully. Frederick's accusations weren't entirely fabricated. There was another man, not as he claimed, but she swallowed visibly. I had developed feelings for someone else. Edward Bennett, my uncle's clerk. Nothing improper ever occurred between us, but Frederick somehow knew. It gave credibility to his lies. And this Edward, did he care for you as well? He said so, she replied softly. But when Frederick's accusations began, when my reputation was questioned, Edward did nothing. He let me face the scandal alone rather than risk his position with my uncle's firm. Her amber eyes held Zane steadily. That's why your offer in town that day meant so much. You were willing to risk everything for a stranger when a man who claimed to love me wouldn't risk anything at all. Zane took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. Edward Bennett was a fool, he said simply. A small smile touched her lips. Perhaps it worked out for the best. The admission hung between them, full of possibilities neither had dared voice. Zane found himself leaning forward, drawn by something more powerful than the caution that had governed his life for so long. A pounding at the door shattered the moment. James burst in without waiting for an answer. Boss, the Murray brothers broke out of jail. Sheriff says they're headed this way, making threats about settling scores. Zane rose, instinctively moving to stand between Sophia and the door. How many? 5. The brothers and 3 of their cousins. All armed. Get the men, Zane ordered. Position them around the house, but no shooting unless absolutely necessary. As James departed, Zane went to the cabinet where he kept his Winchester rifle. Sophia stood despite her injury, face set with determination. I'll load the shotgun. You should rest. This is my home too, she reminded him, echoing his earlier words. I won't hide while you face danger alone. There was no time to argue. Within minutes, they heard horses approaching, fast and reckless, with whooping calls that confirmed the riders' continued drunkenness. Zane positioned Sophia by the back door, where she'd have escape options, while he took station by the front window. Sterling, Roy Murray's voice bellowed from the yard. Send out that fancy Eastern wife of yours. We got unfinished business. Go home, Roy, Zane called back. You're trespassing on private property. That Boston hussy broke Charlie's arm when her wagon crashed, another voice shouted. Damaged our horses too. She owes us. Zane saw Sophia's expression harden at the blatant lie. Your brother was uninjured when the sheriff locked you up, she called. Any injuries were sustained during your escape. Shut your mouth, woman. Roy's anger escalated. You think you're better than us with your fancy talk? Everyone knows why you really came west. You're nothing but a... The crack of Zane's warning shot cut off whatever vile accusation was coming. The next bullet won't go over your head, he promised, his voice deadly calm. Leave now. My men have you surrounded. A tense silence followed, broken by muttered conferring among the Mois. Then Roy's voice again. This ain't over, Sterling. That woman brought nothing but trouble to this town. You'll see. The sound of retreating horses confirmed their temporary victory, but Zane kept watch through the night, anticipating the possibility of their return. Sophia refused to leave his side, keeping coffee brewing and taking turns at the window despite her injuries. As dawn broke without further incident, Zane found her dozing in a chair pulled close to his, her hand still holding the shotgun. Looking at her, beautiful even in exhaustion, brave beyond reason, he confronted the truth he'd been avoiding for months. He loved her, not as part of an arrangement, not as a convenient housekeeper or ranch partner, but deeply, completely, with every part of himself he'd thought closed off forever. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like coming home after a long journey. Sheriff Taylor arrived mid-morning, apologetic and concerned. The Mois have left the territory, he reported, headed for Wyoming, according to their uncle. I've telegraphed warnings to authorities there. Relief loosened the tension that had gripped the ranch, but Zane remained vigilant, restricting Sophia's trips to town and assigning men to accompany her when such journeys were necessary. If she chafed under these protections, she didn't complain, seeming to understand his need to ensure her safety. As summer waned, bringing cooler nights and the first hints of autumn color to the valley, word came that Judge Adams would return to Whispering Creek within the week. His house stood ready, repaired and furnished, awaiting its owner, and presumably his niece. The evening after this news arrived, Zane found Sophia on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. She looked up as he approached, her expression unreadable in the fading light. Your uncle will be pleased to see you, he said, taking the chair beside her. He'll find you much changed from the Boston society girl who arrived in spring. She smiled faintly. For the better, I hope. Undoubtedly. He cleared his throat. I imagine you'll be glad to return to town. The judge's house offers more comforts than this simple cabin. Her hands stilled in her lap. Is that what you want? For me to leave? The directness of the question caught him off guard. In all their months together, they had carefully avoided discussing the temporary nature of their arrangement. Now, with the deadline upon them, pretense seemed pointless. No, he admitted, his voice rough with feeling. That's the last thing I want. She turned to face him fully, her amber eyes searching his. Then why mention it? Because I made you a promise. Marriage until your uncle returned, then freedom to choose your own path. I won't hold you to vows spoken under duress. Duress? She repeated softly. Is that how you see our marriage? At the beginning, perhaps, he conceded. But now, she prompted when he hesitated. Zane stood, moving to the porch railing, needing space to find words for feelings he'd never expected to experience. Now I can't imagine this place without you. The house, the land, none of it matters the way it once did. Not without you here. He turned to find her standing too, mere steps away, her face illuminated by the last golden light of day. Zane Sterling, are you saying you want me to stay? As your actual wife, not just in name. Yes, he said simply. I'm saying I love you, Sophia. I didn't plan it, didn't want it, fought against it with everything I had, but there it is. I love you, and the thought of you walking out that door makes everything I've built here meaningless. She closed the distance between them, her hands coming to rest against his chest. I've been waiting months to hear you say those words. You have. From the moment you stood up in town and offered to marry me. Not because you wanted anything from me, but simply because it was the right thing to do. I knew you were different from any man I'd ever met. Her smile was radiant now, open and unguarded. I started falling in love with you that day, and I haven't stopped since. Zane's hands rose to frame her face, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. You love me. With all my heart, she whispered. This place, this life we've built, it's everything I never knew I wanted. You're everything I never knew I needed. He kissed her then, for the first time, not as part of their pretense, but as an expression of the love that had grown between them through shared hardships and quiet moments. Her response was immediate and passionate, confirming her words beyond any doubt. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, Zane rested his forehead against hers. I was so certain that strength meant standing alone, that needing someone was weakness. And now, she asked, her fingers tangling with his. Now I understand that real strength is found in loving someone enough to risk everything, your heart, your future, your very self. He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. You saved me from a loneliness I didn't even recognize until you showed me what I was missing. And you saved me from a scandal that would have defined my life, she countered. We saved each other. As darkness settled over the Sterling ranch, truly theirs now, in every sense, they remained on the porch, planning their future together. The judge would understand. In fact, Sophia suspected he would be delighted by the genuine happiness his niece had found. 2 days later, when Edward Adams arrived in Whispering Creek, he found his niece waiting not at his repaired house, but at the church, where she and Zane renewed their vows, this time with full hearts and clear intentions before the entire community. The judge gave his blessing without hesitation, noting with approval the transformation in Sophia and the devoted way Zane looked at his wife. You know, the judge confided during the celebration that followed, when I suggested you come west to escape that unfortunate situation in Boston, I hoped you might find peace. I never imagined you'd find love with a man worthy of you. Sophia watched Zane across the room, talking easily with neighbors who had become friends. Neither did I, uncle. But sometimes the greatest blessings come from the most unexpected circumstances. As winter settled over Montana territory, the Sterling Ranch thrived. The cabin expanded to include a proper library filled with books from Boston and a nursery that would welcome their first child come spring. In the evenings, Zane and Sophia sat before the fire, planning their future while snow blanketed the land outside. No longer isolated individuals facing the frontier alone, but partners whose love had transformed both their worlds. What had begun as a marriage of convenience to save a woman from scandal had become the salvation neither of them knew they needed. proof that even in the wild, untamed West, love could flourish in the most unexpected circumstances, healing wounds they hadn't recognized, and creating a home built on something far stronger than timber and nails, the foundation of two hearts that had found in each other exactly what they needed.